Despite the storm, early mail-in voting in your state is now underway, and early in-person is underway. But I'll tell you what, I'm hearing very good things now. It hasn't been going on too long, but we're seeing numbers. They're saying, wow, those are big numbers.
Election night obviously is on November 5th, and by the way, we will be live streaming it, so be sure to tune in then. But in many ways, this election has already began because early voting is now open in most of the major states, and we know how the system really works now. It's not just election day, it's election month. You can criticize that as much as you want, but frankly, it is the current system we deal with, and so it's very important to talk about. Now, the common consensus since 2020 has been that the election month system is something that is going to be very bad for Republicans because all this mail-in voting, all this early voting opens up the door for, first of all, shady things, but also organically higher Democrat turnout. But now that in 2024, some of that early voting data is starting to come out, you are seeing some of the opposite. In fact, early voting began yesterday in Georgia, for instance, and you're starting to see some trends that are actually very favorable for Donald Trump. We'll tell you all about that today and how some of the early data seems to indicate Trump is on path to victory in this election. Now, a lot can happen. I'm not saying to get complacent. I'm certainly not saying to get arrogant. Make sure you personally are registered to vote, have a plan to vote, and are actually going to go and do it. But I do want to provide, I guess, a little bit of optimism and generally talk about the state of the election. So with that said, before we get into this, folks, please do me a big favor by hitting that like and subscribing to the channel using those buttons down below. Why should you subscribe? Because doing so goes a long way in ensuring we can keep bringing you videos like this. It is the #1 way to support the content. It's free, and it's a great way to stay on top of all of the breaking news. So, great reasons all why you should hit that red button down below. But with that said, one of the big stats being discussed is that early vote turnout right now in Georgia is at an all-time record high. Now, you may hear that out loud and think, how could that possibly be good news for Donald Trump? Like, aren't Democrats usually the ones that vote early and then Republicans come out on election day? That should be really bad news if we have record high early vote turnout, except when you delve a little bit deeper here into these numbers, that is not actually true. Eric Daughtry reports here that day one of Georgia early voting data is out, and it was a good day for the Trump counties, right? The counties that voted for Trump in 2020 are most likely going to vote for him again. We do not have party registration, but we have the 2020 results and turnout rates. The more red a county on average, the higher turnout it was. What does this all mean? What we are actually talking about is that early voting turnout is very high, yes, but it is high not because of Democrat areas, not because of inner city Atlanta, where Republicans, yes, should be panicking if you see astronomically high turnout in those places like you did in 2020, but it's actually the opposite. It is exurban Atlanta. It is a lot of the Republican areas that are seeing massive increases of people showing up to vote early. That is a highly optimistic sign for a number of reasons, because obviously Republicans still in 2024 will have a massive election day advantage. But if we're also winning or doing very well, at least with early votes, then you know the story there. The math is basically impossible for Kamala Harris to be able to win. Now, obviously, ever since the 2020 election, Trump supporters have raised a lot of concerns about voting by mail and, the potential for ballot harvesting. Of course, vote by mail tends to, yes, heavily favor Democrats more than any other form of doing so. But check this out, ladies and gentlemen. Compared to the 2020 numbers on day one, which was yesterday, October 15th, Georgia vote by mail is down 97% from 2020, and in-person voting early is up 59%. Now, obviously, a portion of that statistic is completely logical. In 2020, we had COVID. Yes, I'm sure even more Democrats now are going to be showing up to vote in person, but still, it's one thing to be down even 50%, but 97% down of mail-in voting requests from 2020, there's no way to spin it. That is a huge drop-off. What may also be an extremely concerning sign for Democrats, not just in Georgia, but in also other urban places like Detroit, like Philadelphia, is that by all metrics we can see in terms of this early voting, it is black turnout that is contributing to the drop-off from 2020. And again, when you hear high voter turnout in Atlanta, the image that usually comes to your mind is inner city Atlanta, a lot of black voters, voting for Democrats in very high margins and trying to replicate a Biden victory or a Raphael Warnock victory that we've seen before. But in a place like DeKalb County, which is in inner city Atlanta, obviously a very high black population there. And this is a place Democrats, in order to win the state of Georgia, really need to turn out black Democrats in high margins, are underperforming their turnout in comparison to 2020. And we are seeing very similar trends of lower black turnout in places like Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, which is in the city center of Pittsburgh. So the early vote data is telling us two key things that lean in a very good direction for Trump. First of all, early vote turnout in Republican areas is much higher than it was back then, which seems to suggest that, as I've been saying for a long time, this election's going to come down to turning out those lower propensity Republican or Trump voters. People who would vote for Trump, but maybe were too lazy to in 2020, don't really care that much about elections enough to really show up or do the work. But if this is happening in terms of early voting, which typically would target, lower propensity voters, people who don't want to vote as often, then that means likely it's not just Trump 2020 voters that are showing up, but maybe perhaps even newly registered voters in these Republican areas now showing up to form a bigger coalition for Donald Trump. But on the flip side, probably the much more telling statistic, if turnout in early voting is lower in black areas than it was in 2020, that suggests very good news and perhaps indicates why characters like a Barack Obama are being brought out of the woodshed to try to shame and yell at black people for not voting in high enough margins. Folks, things are looking good.
Despite the storm, early mail-in voting in your state is now underway. And early in person is underway. But I'll tell you what, I'm hearing very good things now. It hasn't been going on too long, but we're seeing numbers. They're saying, wow, those are big numbers. So, in fact, they set a record for the number of ballots today, right? Right? So if you have a ballot, return it immediately. If not, go tomorrow as soon as you can. Go to the polls and vote. Then, for the next 21 days, get everyone to get out and vote. We don't want to take a chance. We can't lose this country. We're going to lose our country if we're not successful. We're going to lose our country.
By the way, folks, if you're curious about other states, let's look at Pennsylvania. The new mail-in ballot requests as of October 15th, 2024, 29,936 for Democrats, 29,416 for Republicans. That is right. In terms of mail-in vote requests, something that usually heavily favors Democrats by a lot, it is basically tied 1-to-1 in terms of Democrats and Republicans, which means, first of all, in Pennsylvania, they are very unlikely to be able to replicate what you saw in 2020 because literally there are not enough mail-in ballots out there for potential Democrats. But on top of that, it also suggests, like I said, if there are more Republican voters going by mail and going early than ever before, that seems to me to indicate as well, we're doing a very good job of turning out those lower propensity, lower turnout people, which I've been saying for the longest time will be the key to this election. Lastly, if you're curious here out of Michigan, the RCP average now flipped for Donald Trump in the lead. That is right. Donald Trump now leading in the polling average in the state of Michigan by 1 point. This is, keep in mind, Michigan is that Rust Belt state that's a little bit harder to crack, leans a little more Democrat. Today has Trump +1. For context here, at this time in 2020, Biden led by 7.2 in Michigan, Clinton led by 11.4. Look how fast things have changed. Folks, again, it's looking very good. Okay, based on the polling, but polling is polling. We know it can be inaccurate, but that hard early voting data seems to suggest very good signs. And like I said, that's why Democrats are panicking. That's why Obama's going to the black areas and stuff, because they know things are not looking very great for them. But again, one last time, I'm going to say again, not a reason to get complacent. Make sure you go vote. Make sure everyone you know is registered and is going to go to vote for Trump, etc. But if we can all deliver and bring this home, as I've been saying, the popular support exists. We just got to deliver on it. Then Kamala Harris's communist destruction of this country will be averted. We will have 4 more years of Trump. Things are looking optimistic. We just gotta finish the deal. And with that said, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. And until next time, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new. God bless and peace.